Hello and welcome to the Young Entrepreneurs Connect podcast. Today we are joined with Steve Grace. Steve, how are you going?
Very well, Oscar. Thank you very much for having me on a lovely sunny Friday afternoon.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know, Steve has worked in a variety of consulting roles, particularly in the recruiting space, and is the founder and CEO of the Nudge Group, an employment agency for startups and high growth ventures. So Steve, maybe if we start a little bit in your background, your past. So how do you
Sure.
feel that your work at the beginning of your career with both Lombard and Computer People influenced your career progression and approach to recruiting?
Interesting question. So they're two very different jobs. So Lombard was a career I took because a lot of people in my school went into finance, and I went into finance like everybody else. I did not enjoy it, I can tell you that. But I did learn a lot about working in a large company. And for anyone who doesn't know, Lombard's owned by NatWest Bank, and I was working in what was called motor finance, and I used to look up after a whole bunch of, I guess, franchise dealerships, so Nissan dealerships and Toyota dealerships and so forth. And Lombard was the backer behind Nissan Finance and Toyota Finance. So
Sure.
that taught me a lot because I spent my day driving around car dealerships, meeting with different people. And I think when you're in that raw environment, and car dealers are not known for mincing their words,
Mm.
and these were big dealerships, and but they had big, powerful dealer principals who might have owned 20 sites. You had to be on your game. So I learned a lot in that role. I just did not enjoy finance. I'm not a numbers person,
Mhm.
so I learned that very early on. Computer People was actually my very first recruitment job, and I fell into that because I went into the office in London in NatWest to resign. I was walking back to the tube station. I saw Computer People, and I thought I should go in there and see if they've got any jobs because I quite like computers. And
Yeah.
then they offered me a job on the spot. So that was a long, long time ago. And it was a very brutal environment. There was no email, there was no, you got a phone, you didn't get a chair. It was like something out of a really bad movie.
Mhm.
But that really taught me, I think, resilience because you could be there a year. If you didn't do a deal of a week, you got fired. It was as simple as that. There were 80 of us in
Wow.
this enormous sales floor, and it was that simple. You did at least one deal every week. And if you were smart, even if you did two, you kept the other one for the next week, right? So
Yeah.
it kind of taught me survival, I think. So those two experiences were both quite horrifying in a lot of ways when I look back at them. Not that you think that at the time,
Mm.
but they probably just prepared me to be resilient for a role in recruitment, which is very much highs and lows. Recruitment is a very high and low industry.
Mhm. Yeah, well, obviously, I can see how that resilience early on would have, really gave you an advantage and helped you feel, what eventually became your career. And then just after those couple gigs that you had, were there any experiences or events in particular that maybe inspired you or gave you the idea for what I believe was your first company, Fingerprint Solutions?
It was my first company. I think that was always going to happen. I think that came from my father. My father was a very accomplished dentist. All my family came from Harley Street, and they were dentists, and going back since time began, I think. And my dad ended up with the ability not to be able to perform dentistry anymore. He had a solid neck bone that he found out when he was about late 30s, at which time he had three kids at private school, his own business, and a house and a mortgage. And he was like, what the hell do I do? I've
Yeah.
strained to do this my whole life, and now I can't work. And he went out and he started businesses. He started a business importing rap music. He started a training company. He wrote books on computer programming, which was just sort of emerging at that
Wow.
time, financial planning businesses. He became an editor of a magazine. And I just saw him go and try all these different things. And that had a massive impact on me because I watched someone create something out of nothing. And I think that was something that I always knew I was going to do. Fingerprint, I was delayed because I was in Australia. I moved to Australia when I was 25, and
Hmm.
I couldn't do that until I was a resident. So I had to wait until I got off my visa. As soon
Yeah.
as I was off my visa, I resigned the next day and I started the
Wow.
Fingerprint.
You definitely didn't waste any time on that one when you could do it.
I'd been waiting a while. I'd been waiting. It takes. I don't know if anyone has ever gone through the immigration process. It's not a quick process. It was a long time ago, 2003, I think it was. But yeah, it took a while.
All right. So now maybe moving forward to your more recent work. So I saw in a recent interview of yours, and also probably a lot of the rationale behind your work at the Nudge Group, where you explained that recruiting at startups and also ventures going through such high rates of growth is often so much harder than, you know, conventional corporate companies. So for our audience, would you mind providing a bit of background into why that actually is?
I think particularly startups and scale-ups have different problems. So in my view, just to sort of define that, startup is probably a company that's, I don't know, under 150 people, and it's sort of just entering a sort of funding rounds with venture capitals, whereas the scale-ups got no real money problems anymore, and it's just a case of growing as fast as possible. So when the startups are growing, it's very difficult because you've got to get the culture right. Mostly founders have no experience in hiring. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're looking for. They don't know how to sort of go and find people and interview people. And they also don't understand the kind of people they need. There's a very different kind of individual you hire in a startup than you hire in a scale up. You know, a startup, there's a lot of ambiguity. People are running around doing a lot of different jobs. You don't have a job description per se. You're all just powering towards a goal. Whereas when you move into scale ups, then you've got a lot more structure and there's a lot more sort of singular roles that have specific goals, and you have to work very much more as a team with all very specific parts of achieving that team, like a basketball team, right? Where you've got people shooting, you've got people defending, you've got guards and so forth. That's what sort of scale up is. Now, where scale-ups struggle is that they hire at such fast rates. So you might see a company go from 50 to 200 in 8 months. Right. Very hard to get that right because you're trying to do things so quickly. You're cutting corners. You're often coming out of the startup phase and haven't necessarily understood that you need to actually start hiring different types of people. Your culture can get out of control. You get subcultures. You lose the identity that the company had as a small. There's endless problems, and it's a terrifying time because you're spending huge amounts of money and there's this constant change, and a lot of people find that quite difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two sort of main things. But I think overall, whenever you're hiring a lot of people, to get them all to gel together is difficult because there's no time for, get one settled in, get another one settled in. It's just boom, everybody all at once. And it's kind of a mixed match of personalities, hoping it's going to come together. And as a leader, you have to make that happen. And it's just not an easy thing to do at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking about getting everyone to come together and maybe gel together, I've seen a concept where startups might bring people on for, let's say, a more informal introduction or onboarding, where maybe for a few weeks they might bring them on more so unofficially and give them some tasks to be able to truly see where they might be able to provide value to the company. So what's your personal take on, these sort of courting periods in terms of hiring and recruiting for startups?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I often get clients saying, we want to take them on a contract first to try them out and what you're describing. If you actually look at in Australia particularly, if you look at the Australian employment system, every permanent employee has a 3 or 6 month probation period. Right. And that probation period is exactly that. It's for the candidate to decide if they like the company and the company to decide if they like the client. And if they don't, they can leave at a day's notice without any reason. Sure. So it's kind of inbuilt into that, but people don't seem to see it that way. And it's funny, people I don't know what they see that is. I think companies see it as a right to get rid of someone if they made a bad hire. They don't necessarily see it as the candidate trying them out. And they go, I want to try them on contract before I hire them. It's like, well, that's what this probation period is for. So my conversation to all of them is, you have that already. You can make it 3 or 6 months. So I think more people seem to understand that it's already built there. The legal system is designed perfectly for this. But yeah, people don't see it that way. I've been trying to educate people on this for years. Yeah. So maybe this podcast will help.
Absolutely, definitely going to spread the word. So something that was discussed on one of the most recent episodes of our Young Entrepreneurs Connect podcast, with a guest called Jonathan Chak, was the idea of operating a business where the founder or the management team isn't necessarily simply trading their time for money, where that might mean that even if they're not at their desk working switched on, they're still able to set up something that will continually provide revenue. So what's your take on this idea about, operating, let's say, like a real business? And how do you address this in your current role as the CEO of the Nudge Group?
Interesting question. There's two very different answers. So I think if you're in a product-based business, that's exactly what you do.
Hmm.
Everything you would see in the last 2 years, the rise of software as a service companies, the rise of
Mm.
online e-commerce companies, they can
Yeah.
operate on their own. That you don't need someone. They have what they, and those
Hmm.
companies are measured on their recurring revenue. So the effort there is really about building the product that people want and will continue to pay for ongoing. So that's how you do that in product business. Very easy, and it's sort of a
Yeah.
standard model. In a services business like ours, it's more difficult because you are providing a service, and it depends how you view it. I don't view us as trading our time for money.
Sure.
I never have. I think that we provide a lot of value in a lot of different ways, and some of that we charge for, and some of that we don't.
Right.
And I think it's a lot of it comes down to perception. You can certainly automate things now. You can use technology much more easily to increase your ability to spend less time. But ultimately, unless you're going to use artificial intelligence or robots or something like that, the service business is always going to have an element of time to money to it.
Sure.
As a owner of a business, then you can make that more efficient. And I think that's probably the best way of looking at doing that. And we have efficiencies all the time coming in. And that can be through great ideas, which often new people come in. We've had some great graduates come in that blown me away with their ideas that no one's ever thought of. So embracing all different thoughts is very key. Automating things through technology is obviously key. But I think from a service point of view, it's very, very difficult. You can create self-service. Banks are doing this and have been doing this for a long time. There's ways of doing that in what we do. We're always looking to make the thing more efficient.
Right.
But I don't think you'll ever remove it in service, because service, that's kind of the definition of a service to
Yeah.
some degree.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a difficult one. But product businesses, gosh, that's
Mm.
the model now. That's the blueprint the whole world's going for. And I think it's a healthy one, because I think you are limited. The one thing you cannot change in your life is how much time you have. So you don't want to be wasting it. You want to be
Yeah.
using it as efficiently as possible. And I think you just got to continuously strive to do that better.
Sure. Well, yeah, you definitely provided some great insights about how you approach delivering a service in your current role with the Nudge Group. So if we could maybe step back for a second, where was it that you first might have got the idea, or first started to really understand and realize, hey, there's a serious problem here, which also represents an opportunity to found the Nudge Group?
I think so. When I left my business prior to the Nudge Group, I had not enjoyed the last couple of years there for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And when you sell a business, and I sold to my business partner in that instance, when you sell a business, you have a time where you're not allowed to work, which in this instance was
Yeah.
6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then during, when I first left, I was out of recruitment in my head. I'd done it for too long. I didn't want to do it. And then over time, as you sort of relax into your time off, you start to think, okay, well, what are you good at? Well, I'm good at recruitment because I've done it for a long period of time. But I need to do it differently because I'm not enjoying it anymore. So you start to think about the world, and you think, oh, there's this huge upturn and surge in startups and online businesses and e-commerce and SaaS. And we dealt with some of those in my last business. And recruitment is a very old industry that has not developed and not evolved. And it didn't work well with this new industry as in startups and scale-ups. Now, to me, this was a huge opportunity because I love startups, because I've started 3 companies. It's something that I really enjoy and something that I feel I understand. So I thought, well, maybe we need to build a company that actually services these companies and no one else, specifically designed for them,
Right.
completely designed with all them. So then I sat around and thought, what are all the things that I hated about recruiting for startups when I was in my normal company? And then I rang a whole bunch of startup founders and asked them what were the things they hated about us. And then we listed those problems and we came up with solutions, and there was the business. And so it was done out of something that it came out of my desire to want to use the skills that I had in a way that I enjoyed. I think that's probably the best way of articulating it.
Sure. It does. It seems like a great concept where you wanted to really rethink how you worked, and I guess how you wanted to essentially spend your work life. So it seems like it was a great idea for you, not only to solve a serious problem and take advantage of that opportunity, but also just personally get back to improving the way you work and just doing things that you really enjoy.
You've got to enjoy it. I'd always loved my job. And so having 2 years of not enjoying it was horrific for me. So I had to find a way back there. And I think if you're really going to provide an amazing service, product, whatever it is you're doing, you've got to love doing it.
Yeah.
So you have to find a way to work out what you're good at, and then find a way of doing it a way you love. And that's, but to be fair to that, I needed that time away from work to be able to come up with that. If I tried to come up with that concept whilst I was working, it would never have happened. Your head is too clouded with English. You need that time to think.
Sure. So we talked about some of the problems in terms of, what startups, the differences between what the problems in recruitment between startups and other businesses. So this idea of a concept known as the Great Resignation has been, brought up a lot in the media lately. Basically, maybe I've seen it maybe the past year or so. So have you seen any major patterns or trends emerge in terms of recruitment for businesses generally, or also startups for companies that you've worked with in, let's say, the past few years?
Massive changes. COVID has changed the way people think, whether it be consciously or subconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. If you go back 2-3 years, most candidates would come to us looking for roles that were probably paying them more money, that were giving them opportunities to educate themselves in some way, and that would be a stepping stone to their next career. That's how everybody thought. Those were the 3 top things.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those were in big international companies, and enabling them to travel and all these sorts of things, right? If you look at the questions that people ask us now, number one question everybody talks to us is about where am I going to work? Mm-hmm. Do I have to work at home? Do I have to work in the office? Can I work in both? If I can work in both, can I do it any time? Or do I have to come in Monday, Wednesdays, or this week or that week? And people want a career in an organization that doesn't tell them what to do. And I think that's come from being told we're in lockdown. Everyone's sick of being told what to do. So that freedom, they want that sense of freedom. And what they also want, and this is probably the more interesting thing, they want a role that has an impact. Now, if you'd said that 2 years ago, that would mean going and working for a non-for-profit, or doing something around sustainable business practices, or doing something to save the planet and so forth. It doesn't mean that now. What that means now, and this is great for the sector that I work in, which is startups and scale-ups, they don't want to work for the big American company or the big global company because they can't see the impact of what they do. They can't see it doing anything. They're just part of a big cog. They want to work in smaller organizations where they can genuinely see that the work they do has an impact on something, and that makes them feel fulfilled. And that's not something that was ever there before. And it's such a strong driver now for people. And they're leaving these companies. And this is the Great Resignation, right? They're not leaving because they're sick. They're leaving because a lot of them don't feel like their life has a lot of meaning. And I think they've realized that by being put into lockdown. And they're now looking for that in companies. And that's why I think you're going to see a big shift in terms of where people are working. So that has been so clear to us in recruitment because we meet so many people. It's been quite fascinating to watch.
Wow. So
wow, indeed.
Well, yeah, it's quite interesting to hear your own take of it. Given you have such insight into the recruiting industry, and then just myself comparing it to certain media posts you might see about everyone's just hating work and people aren't happy. But for you to come at it from that other end and just provide, it seems like it provides a lot more holistic and probably more like practical explanation for some of these trends.
Look, unfortunately, media is, I'm not a fan of media. I think that they cause a lot more problems to create stories, to sell advertising, I think a lot of the problems we've had in COVID, a lot of the problems we've had with lockdown, a lot of the problems we've had with AstraZeneca, all these things are driven by them trying to create a story, right? So, my advice is don't read the media or just read as much as you can and then form your own opinion, because it's so biased and it change. And you can read in the same publication 2 articles that completely say the opposite argument against each other. 100% this is true. So I'm glad that you like my view on it. I think it's a bit more, it makes a bit more sense than some of the things. The Great Resignation because everyone's hating work, that's just not true. It's simply not true.
So moving on, maybe more personal now. Obviously, we did reference the resilience that you stated that you gained from your early roles. So, in reference to the active recruiting, whether it be with the Nudge Group or your past roles, what kind of other personal attributes do you see that give yourself, or also members of your team, the advantage when it comes to matching employees with employees, given the nature of uncertainty that exists with this?
I think the number one, and the uncertainty is a funny term because everything's uncertain. Uncertainty is a perception. And people feel uncertain now, even though they're really no more uncertain than they were before in actual reality. But
Yeah.
I think the number one trait is definitely empathy. No question. 100% empathy. If you cannot view things from someone else's point of view, you cannot do our job. It's just impossible. You have to view the client's point of view, you have to view the candidate's point of view, you have to view your own point of view, and you have to be objective. So that's the number one thing we look for. The next thing we look for outside of resilience is very much energy.
Okay.
When you're dealing with people, energy is something that is exchanged between people, objects, everything all the time. And to take someone on a journey where they're moving jobs or someone's hiring someone to their business, they're both very emotional from both points of view. And you have to be able to give energy to them to help them feel it's all right, to get them to understand it. So those would be the three things. Resilience, energy, and empathy are definitely the key three things that I think are essential to doing what we do.
Yeah, that's great. And I feel that our audience would definitely resonate with some of those values. So speaking of our entrepreneurial enthusiast audience, do you have any other personal advice for these people? Let's say young people maybe coming out of high school, in university, just generally interested in the entrepreneurship and startup space.
I would say this is a question I get asked a lot. I think the key thing, if you want to come out and you want to be entrepreneurial, you need to work out what that is through trial and error.
Okay.
I'm not a big believer of following your passion. I quite dislike that term. Sometimes a passion should say a passion, not always, but sometimes it should. I don't think that's the answer. I think what you need to do is you need to find out what you're good at. And the only way you're going to find out what you're good at is by trying a number of different things. Now, they can be within a certain area. For example, if you want to be a lawyer, you could be a lawyer, but what kind of lawyer are you going to be? Well, you need to try more than graduate programs and you need to do that, right? Similar sort of concept, where you can either try a lot of different industries, a lot of different jobs. It doesn't matter. Try a lot of different things. Work out what you're good at. Then once you've worked out what you're good at, and this is exactly what I did with the Nudge Group, right? Work out how you can do that in an enjoyable way. And that it will take time. And don't worry about the 10,000 hour rule. That will come. Everyone worries about that these days. Work out what you're good at. Everyone is naturally good at something. If you're naturally good at something, you will enjoy it more. If you enjoy it more, you'll become even better at it. And if you then you'll enjoy it even more, and then so forth and so forth, and you end up becoming a master at it. And that there's nothing more enjoyable than being a master of something. Doesn't mean you can't have other things that you love that you're terrible at. That's perfectly fine. But I wouldn't push them into your career, because I think your career affects so many other people. You want to be able to give the world, if you like, what you're good at, what you were designed to do. So you need to work out what that is and then find a way to push that out to the world. That would be my advice.
Yeah, that definitely seems like very, very valuable advice for our young enthusiasts. So Steve, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience?
No, I think the generation coming through is going to be far more entrepreneurial. I think it's so positive. I think the new ways of thinking, the restrictions that used to sit on young people because of the way the world was set up have gone. I think it's going to be one of the most exciting times of innovation, because there's freedom to be able to take your ideas at a much younger age before someone stifles them and stifles you. So I can't wait to see what's going to happen, to be honest. I think my advice is just get out there and give it a crack. It's never as hard or as scary as you think it is once you've done it. Just like jumping off a rock into the ocean. First time's terrible, second time not so bad, third time's easy. It's exactly the same with entrepreneurship. So you just got to jump off that rock, basically.
There we go, jump off that rock. There's a good title. All right. So thanks for giving us your time, Steve. I'm sure the audience at home would really appreciate your insights and sharing a bit about your own experience, and especially the advice towards the end.
Pleasure. And if anyone ever wants to chat to me, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat to anyone about anything.
Okay. Cheers, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.